That alone, verse number 89. Existing in knowledge as the being of non-being, countless sparks arise, causing the appearance of the world. So, apart from knowledge, there is not another thing. Thus one should know. This knowledge bestows the state of oneness. Commentary. In physical sciences like chemistry and physics, the operations of laws are demonstrated through experiments. Scientists postulate a hypothesis and test it, and arrive at an assessment of truth based on the results. Analogies in philosophy correspond to experiments in science. Both experiments and analogies are essentially examples. The kingdom of God is illustrated by Jesus Christ using a number of examples. Analogy is one of his favorite methods, where each analogy highlights a particular aspect of the divine realm. Vedantins generally approve of direct perception, pratyaksha. They also use anumana or inference, upamana or analogy, and shabda or word testimony. Two other methods are arthapatti and anupalabdhi, the argument of non-contradiction and the proof by residue or by elimination. Of these, upamana is the method relevant to the present verse. Analogy is an a priori teaching. Actually, it is not a priori to the person who presents it, but it is a priori to the person who listens or receives it. In analogy, one has to take the word testimony of the person who gives it as true, and then try to see the way in which that person is seeing. What it boils down to is a person who has had a vision is inviting us to share it. Here Narayana Guru is giving us a vision of truth as he sees it. From knowledge, innumerable offshoots spring forth, like sparks leaping from a campfire. They burst out, fly up, and disappear. What he means by knowledge is identical with the Self, God, the Absolute, or whatever name you prefer to give it. This is related by analogy to the fire, the one common source from which all sparks come. What we see here as the world is nothing more than the continuous rising up of sparks from a common source. The sparks can be of different magnitude and brightness, and some may remain for a long time, while others have but a brief existence, but ultimately they all disappear. What is a spark? The spark that comes from firewood is a tiny piece of carbon. It is not luminous on its own. The carbon is being oxidized, so it is transforming and changing. It cannot remain as it was. Now it is glowing, luminous. And what is the significance of the glow in this analogy? When we look at a book, we see many tiny ink marks on the pages. If the book is in some language we can't read, like Chinese, all we see are beautiful forms and patterns. However, the so-called beautiful patterns are our projection. All that's really there is carbon molecules adhering to white paper. If the book is in a language we know, we may never notice the ink at all. As soon as we look at it, each formation presents a familiar notion to articulate a sound. We start reading the instant we look at it. Each word flashes and bursts in our mind as a meaning. There are millions of sparks on the page which all come and burst into meaning in us. It is this meaning that bursts from the seemingly inert matter into the brilliance of significance that is being represented by the glow of sparks in the Guru's analogy. Is there any difference between the tiny periods and commas on a sheet of paper and this great universe? The star up there is one mark, the period here is another mark. In both, there is something that comes for a little while, reveals a certain idea, and then fades away. Each in its own way is a spark of the one fire. Narayana Guru qualifies the sparks as asadasti, unreal, real. The mode is unreal, yet the brightness they have is real. The whole world is like this. So the whole world is nothing but an asat, an unreal medium, which brings us meaning for the time being. The sparks may disappear, but our experience of their light is impressed on us first. Another thing is that the sparks don't just exist individually. They can be correlated with each other. Although each has its own distinctiveness, our eye passes from one to the next, building up complex meanings as it goes along. The ideas grow and become continuous, and the whole thing shines in us as knowledge. From our very birth, constellations of ideas are coming to us like sparks, becoming meaningful. The whole universe is like a book, in that everything in it is a symbolic expression of higher truth. We are getting educated in that truth day after day. That truth grows, sustaining the meaning and value of life. If you turn to it, you see there is nothing devoid of knowledge. Such knowledge brings you to the oneness of everything. This is a verse whose meaning is so simple, it is difficult to elaborate. You just have to visualize the whole analogy as it is expressed. From knowledge as both unreal and real, countless sparks are rising up to build the universe. But its simplicity is very rich in implications. We start from a basis, adhisthana. From the basis an occasion arises. Every experience is like an occasion that is arising. Like a spark catching your attention, you are drawn to a tiny little luminous aspect in the experience. Then another spark comes and your attention is distracted. You go from one spark to another. The spark doesn't remain anywhere. It is always moving. All the sparks are moving. You cannot give your attention to many sparks at the same time, but you can shift from one to another. By the time your attention has shifted, if you look back to the other one, it's already gone. A man I know was very worried about his wife because each wanted to have their own way and they couldn't adjust to each other. Then suddenly he came to a realization. He told her, "Hereafter we have no quarrel. You go your way, wherever you like, but don't expect me to sit here and wait for you. If you come back, you may not see me, or you may find me with another woman. Let it be like that. Sparks don't wait, they just fly off. As you go from one spark to another, don't think that you can somehow get back. That's the way life is." Life is both real and unreal. It is unreal to the extent that the stuff which holds the light burns away, so you cannot retain it. Time passes and slips away. Two things come together, they get separated. Flux, motion, movement. That is one reality. The other is the external source. We are told earlier that only a philosopher sees the eternal source as the same, while those who are not contemplative live disjunctly from moment to moment. This means only one spark is illuminated at a time. If you understand that sparks will continuously come and go, and that this is intrinsic to the game of life, then you will have no special expectation and therefore no anxiety. The Bhagavad Gita says, no matter what comes, one should accept it as profitable. If it comes, it comes. If it doesn't come, it doesn't come. Rejoice in it. Somehow one has faith that sparks will be continuously coming, and there will be some joy in life all the time. It's just that when you try to capture one and possess it, expecting to get all you need for the rest of your life out of it, you make a mistake. So we have a basis, an occasion, motion, simple luminous units that keep on coming, distraction, whole ensembles. So many things can be extrapolated from this small example. When you turn inward and look at it, relating your personal problems to it, it makes sense. But somehow it is difficult to have this passive view. We tend to exaggerate either the impermanence of all sparks or else the glorious glow of a single one. That glorious spark does not persist forever, and therefore you get frustrated. Either you become totally cynical or you go from frustration to frustration. One who can transcend all the dualities, remaining unattached while enjoying the beautiful glow of the sparks, is well established. Your attitude then is that life is incidental. People come and go. Relationships will be established and then forgotten. That's the game of life. You accept it. A lot of inner tribulation is gone. Many knots inside are unwound. Life becomes easy. This is the axiology or aim of this verse, to teach us that if we can see it is the same fire glowing in all the sparks, it will bring us to a unitive notion of the Absolute. Three great philosophers of India, Shankara, Ramanuja, and Madhva, refer to the same truth in three slightly different ways. Shankara says, Swaswarupa Anusandhanam Bhakti. One should have the knowledge of the true form of oneself. Rupam is form. Swa means one's own. Isn't this body my form? No. When you were a child, you had a different body, and all through your life it has been changing. After a while you will die and your body won't even be around anymore. So that is not your real form. Your real form is what persists in and through all these processes, without beginning and without end. It is ever there. You are in search of your own form. This continuous process of search, of meditation, to arrive at your own true form, Shankara says, is the greatest meaning of life. Ramanuja goes one step further. He says, Swarupa Anandam, the pursuit of the Ananda, the value or meaning of your real form, makes life meaningful. It is not just by knowing you are permanent or absolute, but that you are eternal joy, that your true beingness is present whenever there is joy or happiness. If your happiness is somehow concealed, you do not see your form. Again and again, you are brought to states of depression, disgust, distrust, and misery. That means your true form has disappeared. The asat, the unreal, is intervening. Only when the ananda persists are you having your swarupa. Madhva says, Swarupa Ananda Taratamya. The true form is the basis, like the fire in our analogy, but your individual manifestation is like a spark from that fire. In one spark there may be a little brightness, while in another there is greater brightness. As you move from one to the other, you are constantly comparing them with the original source or basis. Therefore, you continuously examine your small, sparky nature and compare it to the vast, absolute nature and wonder why you don't gain it. So you never feel you are the absolute. That's why you can never become God. According to Madhva, God is independent while you are a dependent factor. He describes God using the term swatantra, meaning that which exists by its own discipline, its own law. It is self-established. From out of this comes the paratantra, that which does not have a life or truth of its own. It depends on the Supreme for its existence. Your body, mind, intellect, everything you are constituted of is a little glow coming from the Absolute. Because of the seeming duality, you get caught up in a continuous taratamya, or comparison of your life with the Absolute. The Sufis use this very methodology for their practice. They go on singing the glory of the Absolute, repeating Allahu Akbar, or He is beautiful, He is merciful, He is kind. They see in themselves a little kindness, and in God absolute kindness. They see in themselves a little prettiness, and in God supreme beauty. Through adoration and praise, they try to enhance their qualities to approximate those of the Absolute. Ramanuja says, continuity is what matters. Even though the sparks come separately, before one dies out, you should catch up with the next and keep up the continuity. That's also fine. Why should you allow any moment of your life to be wasted, to be barren and meaningless? Keep your life interesting. It's up to you. Life is so wonderful. Go on making it more wonderful. You wait for things to happen to you. Why should you wait? It's not necessary. I pull out Plato, look into it and say, oh, wonderful. Then that spark is gone. I put it back and pull out Heidegger. Hi, Heidegger, how are you? He says something very different from Plato. Wonderful. Then that spark is gone and I pull out another. Then I write a letter to a friend in London and say, how about me coming to London? I get him all excited about it. Then I write another letter, I'm coming to Australia. Isn't that a contradiction? Yes, but it stimulates me to think of the possibility of going to two places at the same time. Is it not a joke? Yes, the sparks are all jokes. They come and the next moment they die. Who cares about it afterwards? I completely forget I have written to London and Australia until a plane ticket arrives in the mail. When we were in the hospital attending on Natarajaguru, he would be on the bed. He was half paralyzed. We would all sit there despondently, doing nothing. We would doze off. Then he would call someone and we would get up. He would say, get me out of this bed. Then he would ask us to count each cleaning. He would ask, is it the penultimate? And we would say, yes, that's the penultimate. Now the ultimate. Then he would say, put me back. We would all be wondering what the game was. He said, there is nothing more boring than to be a paralytic patient and have people sitting around. To make life interesting, you have to go on making programs. Then in the middle of the night, he would suddenly cry out, call the nurse. She would come rushing in, thinking he was having a heart attack or a stroke or something. Then he would ask her, have you read Kalidasa's Shakuntala? What do you think of Shakuntala? Can you be beautiful like that? Do you have any boys like Dushyanta coming over the fence? She thinks, what kind of man is this? He calls me on an emergency and then asks if I have any boyfriends climbing over the fence. Narayana Guru says, if you don't do this, if you don't make life interesting, the world becomes a narakam, a hell. Find out your own interests. Keep life exciting. Let new sparks, new joy come. That's how you make it interesting. Shankara says that unless you are in the Swarupa, you are not happy. Ramanuja says the continuity of happiness is important. Madhva says you should again and again refer to the very source of it. All three approaches are agreeable to Narayana Guru. He integrates all three positions into one with his analogy of the fire emitting ensembles of sparks to cause the appearance of a world. The three interpretations are possible. If you conceive the whole of life as one perennial independent factor, the Guru doesn't give any theory here. He only says, if you visualize this, it will give you the joy of your life. You are so conditioned, so dependent on people. You think my happiness is hiding in your pocket. I will sit here and cry until I get it from you. But an infant wriggles and moves and just watches things. Until the age of about 4 or 5, a child invents its own games. It goes on rejoicing by itself. Children live their glory in the little sparks that come along. You can do the same if you are able to retain that freshness. A young man came to see me once who was very confused. He said, my teacher says one thing, but others say other things, and they live a different kind of life. Isn't it interesting that there is more than one way of looking at life? He found it confusing, while I was thinking how wonderful it is that the mind is capable of projecting so many diverse thoughts and ideas. If you see that everything is patterns, formations, it is like the variegated brushstrokes in a painting, and the whole thing is as meaningful as a work of art. Each stroke has a different hue and intensity. Taken separately, some of them can be ugly blotches, like mud or dirt. But if you have the frame of mind to put them all together, you can see the overarching beauty of it. When you try to make everything uniform, you create a hell world. But if you see the unity within the diversity, it becomes instead a great wonder. If you are a spark, how do you find out what is real in you and what is unreal? Maya is defined as sadasat vilakshanam, that which has the special characteristics of being both real and unreal. Maya is often translated into English as illusion, but this itself is misleading. Professor Betty Heinemann, in her Facets of Indian Thought, gives a better interpretation. The Sanskritist might at the outset feel repelled when, for example, the Indian concept of Maya is translated as illusion. The Western mind, according to the present use of illusion, sees here something unreal, deceptive, and delusive. Yet this is not even the primary meaning of the Latin word illusio, from the root lucere, to play. Illusio originally, though this is now forgotten, meant interplay. As such, but only in its original meaning, is it a near equivalent of Maya. Maya, the world of the measurables, from the root ma, to measure, is a relative and transitory display of forms. In this sense, it actually corresponds to illusio, interplay in variant shapes and forms, manifestations of the underlying substance. Illusio, thus interpreted, according to its original meaning, truly is analogous to the Sanskrit term lila, play and display, of the creative urge for world formation and the elusive world manifestation as taught in Indian cosmogony. It is interesting, Professor Heinemann brings Leela into her discussion. Leela has the additional meaning that life is to be taken sportively. A sport gladdens your heart and your mind. Within the sport, there are elements of tragedy and comedy. For instance, in a game like basketball, one side has to win and the other to lose. Winning is joyous and failure is tragic. and these are woven into the very fabric of the sport. In the spark, there is an interplay of these two aspects. The living glow of the spark comes from the very process of its dying out. The subject and object are intertwined, the body which burns away and the meaning of it coming as a luminous glow are both to be taken as part of the game. If it burns with the brightness of a Buddha, the body may perish at the age of 80, but even after hundreds of years, the afterglow lingers as if the spark were still in existence. The joy that we get from it becomes a perennial experience. We have to accept the burning out part of us and see how from the core we can perpetuate more and more interesting glows until such time as the whole thing burns out. Then the essence, the joy, the fragrance, the reputation of it can incite many people to have similar glows coming from them. When you take Maya in this sense, it is not just illusory nothingness. One half is provoking the other half. One half is exacting from the other half its meaning. One half is a challenge to the other half. Truth is a challenge to falsehood. The possible is a challenge to the potential, whereby the probable is asked to actualize itself. All this is revealed when we apply this in our own lives, and through it, life becomes vastly interesting. And the free translation of verse 89 is, "From knowledge countless sparks emerge that are both real and unreal. The conglomeration of them appears as the universe. The understanding that nothing can be other than knowledge will give it homogeneity."